Good evening, Zambia. This is Season 1, Episode 3 of the DBM Chat Hour podcast, which comes to you every Wednesday at 10 p.m. Central African Time. Tonight, we will be tackling the question, how do I realign my identity? Understanding Physical Identity, Part 1. Welcome to the third of the 21-session DBM Chat Hour podcast series. If you are joining us for the first time, my name is Blessed, your host. Last week, we explored identity crisis and attempted to answer the question, what do the different identity crises look like? We also responded to some questions and comments from the audience and integrated these contributions into our session for that day. If you are here for the first time, please ensure to first listen to the two previous session recordings, Season 1, Episode 1 and Season 1, Episode 2. These are all still available online. Catch up and engage in this unequivocally life-changing conversation. Seeing as we didn't have any questions after last week's session, we shall use the previous week's comments from Dumi M on unpacking character and personality to bridge today's session, as well as a comment from Priscilla Banda to link today's session to next week's session. We shall begin by reacting to the comment by Priscilla Banda, and her comment was, because the world is materialistic in nature, we see God through transactions and through relationship. Our jobs are transactional too. As Priscilla comments on how the world we live in is a natural one in which God is reflected, this is the very reason why we shall be discussing both physical as well as spiritual identity, which will be tackled across this week's session and next week's session. The physical identity, like the natural world we live in, will help us to realize the spiritual identity and also to recognize God's intention for our spiritual identity. We cannot detach spiritual identity from the discussion of self-identity, as self is comprised of both the physical and the spiritual aspect. In continued response to Dumi M, who was reassured that we would explore personality and character in detail this week, I am pleased to share that in this week's session, we will look at these two elements in greater detail and explain the importance of personality and character with regards realizing self-identity. In a nutshell, the relevance of personality and character, of which character is a component of personality, is that personality characteristics or traits play a huge role in informing our self-identity. This can be either positively or negatively. It is important, however, to note that because personality characteristics are inherent, can be both negative and positive, and can be embedded in our DNA. Much as personality is largely driven by inherent characteristics, we did see in our earlier sessions how identity can be influenced, and please note, can be influenced but not established by external factors. Like previously mentioned, a positive personality trait could be, for example, a royal bloodline, while a negative one could be, for example, kleptomania. The discussion around whether traits such as the latter can be embedded in one's DNA are discussions around bloodline, which is a spiritual discussion and can be very controversial. We will not embark on that discussion here. However, we will visit this briefly as we discuss spiritual identity during next week's session. For now, let us see how the significance of personality characteristics inform self-identity. Last week's session ended on the reassuring note that identity crisis is not a mental health diagnosis or a medical problem. Unless, of course, one develops identity confusion, which may lead to personality disorder. Personality disorder exhibits itself in compulsive, obsessive personality behavior. Identity crisis is simply uncertainty concerning one's identity. It is a natural state of development in the life of every human being. In the event that one manages to pass this stage of identity confusion and begins to understand their personality inclination, one successfully transitions into identity realization. As we discussed during the first session, personality types are categorized into 4. Personality type A, B, C, and D respectively. If you would like to go deeper into the personality subtypes and further into the 16 different personality subtypes, one could use the 16 Meyer-Briggs type indicator, the MBTI model, which is a personality test that categorizes them into 16 personalities. These personality types categorize people as either introverts or extroverts, sensory versus intuitive, thinking versus feeling, judging versus perceiving. The Meyer-Briggs model is one among many different personality assessment models. It can sometimes be overwhelming to research on more than one model because of the level of detail contained in personality tools such as the MBTI model. However, it is important to remember that the choice of a model is purely a personal preference. We shall briefly look into some of the arguments presented for and against the reliability of the MBTI model, because that is the model we shall be using. Incidentally, there are some people who do not believe and some who do believe in the validity of the MBTI model. Some experts say that the model is unscientific, yet personality psychologists such as Michael Ashton, professor of psychology at Brook University in Ontario, considers the MBTI to be a somewhat valid measure of some important personality characteristics, but one that does have some important limitations. Others say that it is useful for helping people understand details about their personality. Despite the school of thought that questions the MBTI model, a California-based firm that administers the model says that there are approximately 1.5 million people that take the test each year online, and more than 88% Fortune 500 companies, as well as hundreds of universities that use it in the process of hiring and training. However, for the purpose of pursuing our journey on realizing identity, I will recommend that the MBTI is a good tool to use, as it is sufficiently practical to help point us in the general direction of understanding our personal and respective identities, particularly during the course of administering the DBM Identity Mentorship Program. This is because the program aims at helping you to develop a mind map of one's self-identity in terms of weaknesses and strengths in order to master and harness them. And the MBTI sets a good foundation to pursue this task. The MBTI test results are what can be used to further scrutinize an individual's personal characteristics to better understand one's self-identity. The test result in itself is not what determines our self-identity, but is rather a tool that steers us in that direction. I recommend that where one feels a strong urge to dispute a component of the results of the MBTI, one is always free to bridge that gap with correct data that they may already have. We shall not go into great depths of looking at all the 16 personality subtypes in their entirety, as some of you may already know that the MBTI personality test results are extremely detailed. I encourage you, however, to administer the test on 16personalities.com, or indeed any other personality test that you feel more comfortable using. Remember, this personality test is not for the purpose of labeling you or compartmentalizing you into a box. Far from it. A human living soul is unique and intentionally created by his Creator, while man-defined personality characteristics can be subjective and fluid. The reason I encourage you to do this assignment is that one way or another, one must identify within a particular personality category, and this kind of test serves as a good starting point that can be fine-tuned based on how well you or the people around you know you. The MBTI model categorizes individuals into primarily 4 broad classes: the analyst, the thinker, the advocate, and the sentinel. However, most independently developed models do not relate to each other and should rather be used as and when appropriate and applicable. For instance, for purposes of grouping people for a specific task, it may be simpler to use cardiologists Meyer, Friedman, and Rosenman's ABCD personality model. In cases where more detail is pertinent to a role, such as for recruitment purposes, the MBTI model may prove to be more practical and conclusive. In the MBTI model, each personality subtype consists of 2 introverts and 2 extrovert personalities. Each subtype is represented by an acronym which contains firstly the aspect of introvert or extrovert, represented by I and E respectively. Each personality subtype is represented by an acronym which contains firstly the aspect of introvert or extrovert, represented by I and E respectively. Each personality broad category is represented by an acronym that classifies the category as either intuitive, represented by N, and a thinker, represented by T, or intuitive, again represented by N, and a feeler, represented by F, or an observant, represented by S, and judging, represented by J, or observant, again represented by S, and prospecting, represented by P. Each subtype will further be represented as being either judging or prospecting. In this case, judging is referring to decision-making that is objective, evidence-based, while prospecting could refer to decision-making that is subjective and non-evidence-based. We shall shortly see how these acronyms are applied and how they play a key role in informing identity. Firstly, we shall look at the broad category of the analyst. The analysts are intuitive and thinking personality types, known for their rationality, impartiality, and intellectual excellence. Analysts consist of the architect and the logician, which are both introverts, and the commanders and debaters, which are both extroverts. The first type of analysts are architects. Architects are introverts, imaginative and strategic thinkers, with a plan for everything, and are judging. The architect acronym is therefore INTJ, which means that the architect is an introvert, intuitive thinker, and is judging. The second type of analysts are logicians. Logicians are introverts, innovative inventors with an unquenchable thirst for knowledge, and are prospecting. It follows that the logician's acronym is therefore INTP, which means that the logician is an introvert, intuitive thinker, and is prospecting. The third type of analyst is the commander. Commanders are extroverts, bold, imaginative, and strong-willed leaders, always finding a way or making one, and are judging. It follows that the commander's acronym is therefore ENTJ, which means that the commander is an extrovert, intuitive thinker, and is judging. The fourth type of analyst is the debater. Debaters are extroverts. They are smart and curious thinkers who cannot resist an intellectual challenge and are prospecting. It follows that the debater's acronym is therefore ENTP, which means that the debater is an extrovert, intuitive thinker, and is prospecting. Secondly, the broad category of the diplomat consists of the advocate, the mediator, the protagonist, and the campaigner. Diplomats are intuitive and feeling personality types, known for their empathy, diplomatic skills, and passionate idealism. The first type of diplomats is the advocate. Advocates are introverts, quiet and mystical, yet very inspiring, a tireless idealist, and are judging. It follows that the advocate's acronym is therefore INFJ, which means that the advocate is an introvert, intuitive feeler, and is judging. The second type of diplomats are mediators. Mediators are introverts, poetic, kind, and altruistic, always eager to help a good cause, and are prospecting. It follows that the mediator's acronym is therefore INFP, which means that the mediator is the introvert, intuitive feeler, and is prospecting. The third type of diplomat is the protagonist. Protagonists are extroverts, charismatic and inspiring leaders who are able to mesmerize their listeners and are judging. It follows that the protagonist's acronym is ENFJ, which means that the protagonist is an extrovert, intuitive feeler, and is judging. The fourth type of diplomat is the campaigner. Campaigners are extroverts, enthusiastic, creative, are social free spirits who can always find a reason to smile and are prospecting. It follows that the campaigner's acronym is therefore ENFP, which means that the campaigner is an extrovert, intuitive feeler, and is prospecting. Thirdly, the broad category of the Sentinels consists of the logistician, defender, executive, and consul. Sentinels are observant and judging personality types, known for their practicality and focus on order, security, and stability. The first type of Sentinels are logisticians. Logisticians are introverts who are practical and fact-minded individuals whose reliability cannot be doubted and are judging. The logistician's acronym is ISTJ, which means that the logistician is an introvert, observant thinker, and is judging. The second type of Sentinels are defenders. Defenders are introverts, very dedicated and warm protectors, always ready to defend their loved ones, and are judging. The defender's acronym is ISFJ, which means that the defender is an introvert, observant feeler, and is judging. The third type of Sentinels are executives. Executives are extroverts, excellent administrators, unsurpassed at managing things or people, and are judging. The executive acronym is ESTJ, which means that the executive is an extrovert, observant thinker, and is judging. The fourth type of Sentinels are consuls. Consuls are extroverts, extraordinarily caring, social, and popular people, always eager to help, and are judging. The consul acronym is ESFJ, which means that the consul is an extrovert, observant feeler, and is judging. The fourth and final broad category of the explorer consists of the virtuoso, the adventurer, the entrepreneur, and the entertainer. Explorers are observant and prospecting personality types, known for their spontaneity, ingenuity, and flexibility. The first type of explorers are virtuosos. Virtuosos are introverts, bold and practical experimenters, are master of all kinds of tools, and are prospecting. The virtuoso acronym is ISTP, which means the virtuoso are introverts, observant thinkers, and are judging. The second type of explorers are adventurers. Adventurers are introverts, flexible, charming artists, are always ready to explore and experience something new, and are prospecting. The adventurer's acronym is ISFP, which means the adventurer is an introvert, observant feeler, and is judging. The third type of explorers are entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs are extroverts, smart, energetic, a very perceptive person who truly enjoys living on the edge and is prospecting. The entrepreneur's acronym is ESTJ, which means that the entrepreneur is an extrovert, observant thinker, and is judging. The fourth type of explorers are entertainers. Entertainers are extroverts, spontaneous, energetic, enthusiastic people. Life is never boring around them, and they are prospecting. The entrepreneur's acronym is ESFP, which means the entrepreneur is an extrovert, observant feeler, and is prospecting. All of these 16 personality types can seem quite overwhelming to take in. However, once one has completed the assessment and established their own indicative personality, one can then zero in into reviewing only the relevant personality subtypes and delve into specific detail. Remember that this is not an absolute definition of your personality, but rather it must be viewed as a general guide to understanding one's personality. Interestingly enough, some of the results obtained using the MBTI model can also be very much on point, in line with one's true personality. The reason why it is important to have a general as well as a specific idea on one's personality traits is because of 3 key reasons. The first simple reason is that one must have a general idea about these traits because they inform identity. Secondly, personality traits can either be negative or positive, so they help us to determine the negative and positive aspects about our own personality. They can significantly impact identity. Thirdly, these personality traits can reveal some hidden strengths within us that can incline us to who we really are. One important thing that is worth noting about these traits is that even though they are inherent and sometimes involuntary, we actually have a level of control over them. This means that we are able to intentionally regulate them to create an equilibrium within us. The equilibrium in which we find our true identity. As mentioned in the earlier sessions, once some of these identified characteristics become extreme or obsessive, they present a hazard to self and inevitably can derail our focus on anything, including realizing identity. Once this loss of focus occurs and one becomes derailed into false identity, one cannot find their physical, let alone spiritual identity. As today's session title presumes, we are looking at realigning personal identity by understanding physical identity. As alluded to, we shall be reviewing both spiritual as well as physical identity. The relevance of viewing them alongside each other is because of their mutuality. Today, we will explore and understand physical identity vis-a-vis realigning identity. Much as we would instinctively begin with the unseen to the seen, from the spiritual to the physical, in this case, we shall begin by exploring the physical because the natural things teach us about the spiritual things. This applies to identity as well. To define physical identity, we are guided by the physical aspects of our personality characteristics. We will use an example of an anonymous subject whom we shall refer to as Subject A. Subject A, according to the MBTI model, is an ENFJ personality, which means they are an extrovert, intuitive and feeling and judging. Some of their main personal characteristics are that they are warm, forthright, love helping others, and they tend to have strong ideas and values. They back their perspective with the creative energy to achieve their goals. This, combined with input from an identity mind mapping and birth charting session, could translate into, for example, the following keywords and phrases: people person, objective, helper, idealist, goal-oriented, order, process-driven, seed, light. Seed and light having been obtained from the birth chart. This component will be explored more during the next week's session on spiritual identity. These can further be interpreted into an identity statement, which, for example, could be an instrument for natural growth. If, for instance, subject A's career or profession is organization development, this does not automatically imply that this will subsequently be the subject's mandate. However, this realized identity, coupled with the subject's profession, could represent a platform from which to begin to understand that subject's mandate. We shall look at mandate in more detail during Season 2 of the DBM Chat Hour series. For now, let us maintain focus on identity and how we can risk having it distorted. There are two ways in which this could transpire. One way could be that an individual simply does not take time to deliberately pursue the realization of self-identity. And the second way could be that, as we saw in Session 1, when we looked at identity branding, an individual's identity has been informed and been defined by external factors based on the perceptions about that individual. These influences can sometimes be truthful, but they could also be perverted. In the event that these perceptions of one's self-identity are perverted, identity becomes distorted. For now, let us focus on identity and avoid risk having it distorted. We shall again refer to last week's session when we discussed some of the symptoms of identity crisis, which were feeling a strong sense of frustration or confusion regarding self-identity or self-worth, strong and prolonged negativity towards self, deep self-identity related anxiety or depression, and harboring negative self-harm provoking thoughts in relation to self-identity. When one exhibits any of these symptoms, it is likely that therein lies a discrepancy between one's true self-identity and one's perceived self-identity. This becomes a temporary or permanent state of misalignment of identity. In order to realign self-identity, we must approach this process with deliberate positive intention to discover and embrace true identity. The process we have discussed today is that of physical identity, which relates to what we can see about our identity physically and naturally, apart from when we refer to the birth chart. Next week, we shall continue the exploration of realigning identity, but we shall look at understanding spiritual identity, which relates to what we cannot see about our identity physically and naturally. We shall examine the question, how do I realign my identity? Understanding spiritual identity, Part 2, as well as understanding the link between physical and spiritual identity. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel by pressing subscribe below the link. Like and share across your other social media platforms if you found this link useful. Remember to post your comments and questions below to be part of the conversation. Next week, we will begin the chat hour by answering any questions or addressing any comments that you may have. This will play a key role in bridging our conversation to answering the question, how do I realign my identity? Understanding Spiritual Identity, Part 2. Tune in next week, and thanks for listening to this podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, share, and follow. DBM is your pleasure and our business. Good evening, Zambia.